so I'll start. All right, so just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Kelly Spoon. I am a math faculty member at Mesa, and I'm on our online success team, which is called MOST. So those are two of the roles that I have at Mesa. And as I was starting to write this presentation, one thing really stuck with me, which was, why did I write this about textbooks? Thank you. It's nice to see you, Mary. Momoko, good to see you again. And so I was like, why am I talking about textbooks? Like, one of the things that happened at the H5P talk from yesterday, our first presentation from OER week, was one of the presenters was talking about how he gets support for H5P, this thing we were talking about. And he's like, I hate reading. I go to YouTube and I search H5P. And so part of me is like, well, that's pretty much what our students are doing also. So maybe we need to be thinking about right off the bat, are we talking about textbooks here? So textbooks to me are a very static thing. They don't have the like dynamic features that we would hope for students in terms of video, which we know a lot of our students prefer to learn by. And then they don't have like anything that allows the student to check in on their understanding. I mean, they do, I guess they have questions and then questions back the book. But we also know students don't necessarily interact with textbooks the way we would as experts, right? And like going back and forth, reading boxes of like information. So thought I'd just go ahead and start off by changing my presentation title to Are You Ready to Ditch the Publisher? Right? So like, let's make this more encompassing of all publisher materials. So before I just jump into ditching publishers, let's talk about what they do really, really well. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in the chat a link to Jamboard. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a second because I know for some people it's a little bit hard to find the chat when I'm in that mode. Hopefully we've gotten better at Zoom, but so click on that link in the chat. It should take you to I see you all popping in. Thank you very much for participating. It should take you to a Google Jamboard that looks like this. Right, so hopefully we have some reasons that you or your colleagues might be using publisher materials. So maybe you're someone who's still using publisher materials, and so you have some reasons that you use them and OER doesn't work, you think OER doesn't work for you, or maybe you're someone who already uses OER and you want to sell this to your colleagues. So take a sticky note and add something. So you just click on that sticky note and you can just type something in. And then press save, and then you'll have a cute little sticky on the page. So I will give you a minute to do that while I finish my toast. We've got a lot of people excited about the sticky notes just in general. So how this works is when you write in the sticky note, you've just made a sticky note and you can just throw that anywhere on the page. Look, we've got someone already showing up that you can use the different colors. That's lovely. Yeah, someone's got some Jamboard skills, made their sticky note orange. I find Jamboards are really easy if you have a small group and you want to do something where people can add in different formats simultaneously. It's a little bit harder to do some of these things in like a Google. Yes, okay, good. Well, this is good. You've at least nailed the two things I wanted to see. Ooh, interactive assignments, yes. Great, oh, we got a blue. It's really kicking it off. Well, yes, Jamboard works well in the classroom. I will say limitation is sometimes around 30, it starts to tell people there's too many people in the Jamboard and won't let them in, whereas there's no real limit in other Google stuff. But yeah, and then you can see somebody's already moved over to try. And this is not the only thing you can add. You can copy paste into this. You can write into it. So there's lots of ways to interact with a Jamboard if you've never seen a Jamboard before. But I like it because, like I said, people can add without worrying about being on top of each other, which can sometimes happen in a Google Doc. So yes. All right, perfect. So you guys are hitting all the things that I was hoping you would hit in terms of the positives about published materials, right? We had somebody who said the quality of the book is stronger, often more up to date, materials are more current. I agree. I mean, there is money behind publisher materials, right? Those books are written well. They have usually more than one author. They have a team of editors. They have paid a bunch of people who are going to use these books to go through and give feedback. I've been that person many times. And so, yeah, they're nice. And then when you're on like the 20th edition of a book, which doesn't also gives the publishers more money, thousands and thousands of students have gone through it, and people have gone through it and given feedback. And if there's any errata, that's been dealt with. So they're typically very high quality. Another thing that someone said does not work well with Canvas. You guys are getting excited by Jamboard. I could do a whole other talk about Jamboard, but that's for another day. Was the easy to get a package of materials. And so, yes, I remember signing up years ago to do a focus group or something where they paid me $100 to walk through some materials for a textbook. And they had classroom activities with pacing guidelines and like instructor how-tos, videos, even if you wanted to watch a video. It had projects students could do, I mean, like the amount of things, I was like drooling and salivating. And I was like, well, how much is it going to cost my students? And so, yeah, that gets me to my negative here is the price, right? Like, I know I want all these things, but the cost to students is really high. And it's worth talking about because we know our students struggle to have their basic needs met, right? This is all based on a 2020 survey. So this is fairly recent. 59% of students in our district reported that they were housing insecure in the prior 12 months. 18% were actually homeless at some point during that prior 12 months. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you are worried about whether you're going to be able to eat and where you're going to sleep, you are not engaging with course content. And that doesn't even get us into like the textbook piece of this, which from an old textbook survey the district did, we need to redo this. The last one was 2016. We have some data. 50% of students completed the course without ever buying the textbook. They saw it there in the materials. They saw it as required, and they're like, it's fine. And if you were using a publisher courseware, perhaps they went, that's fine. I'll just take the 10% doc on homework. I'm not buying the My Labs, $100, right? This is more expensive, right? When it was textbooks, students, we could put one on reserve, a student could go to the library, but all these amazing things that come with the textbook publisher courseware, students can only access by paying for them. 30% dropped a course entirely. They were like, nope, can't afford it, not worth it to take that hit to my grade. I'm just gonna bow out of this one, maybe try to get into a class later that has a little OER designation. And then 80% of students said that they purchased materials that their instructor never actually used, which is just horrifying. I'm assuming since you're here, you're not one of those instructors, but just, you know, I had 3 boxes, so here's 3 bits of data for us. All right. Another thing that I think is worth noting is I think sometimes we tell ourselves it's fine, financial aid will cover it for the students that need it, right? Students who need those resources, they have support. There's EOPS, there's Star Trio, there's all these programs available to help them. But this was some of the student responses. A lot of them had this same theme, which is, yeah, I have financial aid. It'll pay for some of my textbooks. I don't really know what's going to be reimbursed until after the fact. But I have to pay that upfront cost first, which is a real burden. I mean, I remember being an adjunct and having to pay the $1,000 to go to a conference myself, you know, and then figure out how I was going to make it work until I got that reimbursement after going to the conference and turning in my badge and all of that stuff. So you can imagine how this might be a problem for our students. So here's sort of my plan for today. Hopefully, if you were not already sold on why we need to go OER, But we're going to talk about how we can replace some of that content, right? That high quality content that we're used to seeing, the videos, the textbook. We'll go through assessments and how we can like create those other resources we enjoy. And then I'll give you some small steps. So if you are still loving a publisher text, which I'm going to say, when you first teach a class, having a publisher textbook with all those resources is like having an expert there to guide you. So I don't think there's really much of a replacement for that besides having a course coordinator or someone else to work with. But if you taught a course 2-3 times, you're ready, right? And let's get started. So I did make a document so we could brainstorm if we want to together. So let me get you that link in the chat. Ooh, look at me. I said I was so good at doing the chat and then I just lost it to stare at your faces. There we go. So yes. Cool. So that should take you to just a Google Doc where I have just added a place where if you have specific questions, you could ask them. We do have Madeline Button, who's our OER analyst for the district on this call. So she might be able to jump in and provide you some resources or answers. So if you came here looking for one particular thing and I don't end up talking about it, ask for it here. You can also ask in the chat, obviously. But I find that using Zoom chat as a way to like keep resources and questions is just, it's hard to manage. And so it's nice to have something else, especially this will live forever in your shared Google Docs, right? Like until you decide to like remove it, it'll just be there forever to the end of time. So I also gave us some shared brainstorming places that we can use for later. I was going to edit this if we ended up with different things we didn't. And then a space for if you need help with that transition, to sort of give me name, email, where you are, and then what you wanted help with, because we have a lot of people across the district who can help with these things, and I'll get you in contact with the right folks if you needed some help. So that document is there and you are all in it, and maybe we'll take some time to go back and add some ideas as we go. All right, so textbooks, just straight text. Here is a, I could definitely do a training on Jamboard if we want a training on Jamboard. It's super easy. If we have time at the end, I'll do that. But it's insanely easy. These are just a pile of links of places you can find OER textbooks. I'm going to dive into like my 4 favorite, which are all highlighted in bold there. So if you were looking for an OER text, one of the first places to go is to these beautiful repositories that exist. I bolded OpenStax, but I don't love it. It's good. Their stuff is good. It's all CC. It's all remixed, reuse. But for my subjects, I tend to, well, some of them are okay. I hate their stats book, but that's just me. That's a personal preference. So one of my favorites is LibreText. Right now, ASCCC for OER week is doing a ton of webinars on LibreText. There's like one at noon. So like if you are looking for more on LibreText, you can go there. Let me go ahead and open up the websites. We can see it together. I'll drag it over from my other screen. So LibreText has online textbooks. It's nice because you can search by your actual topic. You can search by going into the different libraries that exist. So it is a nice thing, but one of the best parts is it uses a lot of interactive content. There's a lot of the H5P that we presented yesterday, and there'll be a recording if you missed that, within these textbooks. So these textbooks usually have questions embedded in them, formative assessments, some moving, they're beautiful. Whereas some of the other PDFs don't have a lot of that. There's still that sort of static thing. These are usually very dynamic. And the nice thing is, let me go to math. Come on. You can search however you want. If you go to campus bookshelves, if you know a particular college is doing something well, the nice thing is most of our courses at the community colleges have similar course outlines, right? Especially now that we're eventually going to get those common IDs. So you could go to a community college that any of these community colleges, right, that are in California, and you might look and see if that particular campus has created a bookshelf And then you can find the books that they might have. So College of the Canyons, they're using a bunch of OER stuff, but they're using OER not within LibreText except for these two classes. But if I click on this, I have an entire textbook that has been brought into LibreText. How to read this textbook. So you can see it's all there and lovely. Another option is Merlot. Merlot is amazing for searching resources, especially because it searches more libraries than just its own. So if you've never seen Merlot before, I'll go ahead and just throw that link in the chat. That one's good enough for that. Boom. And then I'll go ahead and come here. So like that course we just saw was math for elementary school teachers. So if I were teaching R210A, which is math for elementary school teachers here at Mesa, I could search that in Merlot. You can see it's giving me a lot of information that's not necessarily what I'm looking for, but if I click on other libraries, I got some Google books, I got that, and that one link out to that Math 130 is there, right? So this is that same course we were just in. So Merlot will search LibreText as well as a bunch of other places for open materials. The last one that I'm going to showcase is Lumen Learning, just because I think their content is, for the most part, really well done. And they do fit one bill that we otherwise don't necessarily get with some of the others, which I will bring over here. So Lumen, let's just go ahead. I'll pull up math because they have my favorite stats book. I'm very annoying, but you didn't search for math. Thank you. So they have a ton of different options here. And let's say I wanted to go with their new introductory statistics. Lumen is open and free. There are exceptions though. So when you first click on things, you get this sort of like, wait, like this one says request a demo. That's unfortunate. But if I go to like their Calc 1, it looks like you have to pay for it, right? It has this like explore this course, request a demo. And one of the things Lumen has is very affordable homework platforms. So they do have like $33 to the student homework platforms, which is better than most publishers. And they have an option where you can have the department pay for a class as opposed to have students pay for it, right? Most publishers will do that if you have funds available at a department level to cover something like that. But if you click on view course content, this is why I wanted to bring up Lumen, because it looks like it's paid. Blah, 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 blah. So you are accessing it, acceptable use. There might be less open. Well, they used to be all open. So this I didn't see earlier. Well, I opened up a different text earlier. So maybe it depends pre-text based on the text. Oh yeah, this one is not lovely. The one I had earlier was cute. Oof, this is all in my open math. Sorry, I truly despise my open math. Let me get it better. It's just so ugly looking that I can't handle it. I'll pull up the one I pulled up earlier, though it was missing some of the stuff I loved. So that's why I didn't want to use it. But if you click on some of these, it'll take you to, like this one doesn't have that disclaimer stuff. It takes you straight to a textbook, which if you look through, you'll find at the end, there's some copyright stuff, openly licensed, blah, blah, blah. It has license at the bottom of each page. So you can decide per page if it's something that you can use. Whereas they have other ones that are the whole courses. So it kind of depends on a course by course, but I really like their setup in terms of like the why it matters and all of that. And then they do the attributions fairly well for these things. And they have a lot of improved pages. But like I said, even if you are thinking about something lower cost, it's usually a pretty good option for some of their ideas. Oh, and then one of the links here, I'll go back, is Mesa's OER suggestions. Our OER librarian has gone through and she made a link for like every single discipline that we had at Mesa, finding everything she could on Merlot and whatnot. So that's another option too. So of course you can just Google it. If something is available online, one of the options we have is to link out to it, right? I will say that our CVC OEI rubric is, if you're going to link out to someone's content, provide students with instructions on how to navigate it, right? Or what they should be doing with it. So a really good example of this, I'm going to borrow an example from the H5P talk yesterday from Sarah Hawkins at City, but she includes videos, right? These are not her videos in her course content. So this is her lecture material. She has included videos and she's telling students what to do with them. Just watch the first minute and 40. Then she has a summit, like a little formative check-in, which is what we were showing. This is the H5P if you needed a sales pitch for that. And then she has another video. In this one, she tells them ahead of time, watch the video and make a note of the following. So you can link out to a other resource that someone has a copyright on, and just have this like, hey, go look at this page. Here are some things to notice while you're on there. Obviously, we love things that we can put within Canvas so that we don't have to have students clicking out and leaving the content, but this is an option, right? So especially if when you go to a site, I'll just show you a couple of my favorite sites for stats, not that they matter for anything, but I just want to show you sort of the differences. Let me just write over this. Some websites, right? This is not on Merlot. This is nowhere. This is, I teach statistics, and this is really geared towards AP statistics, but they cover all the same content as we do, plus some, minus some, but close. And if you scroll down, they have a copyright, but they also have the terms of use, and they have this license from Creative Commons. So they have it very clear what you can do with their content. I can copy and redistribute the material for free, and I can redact it, remix it. Thank you, StatsMedic. This is amazing, right? Another popular math site that I constantly link my students out to because I used it, that's how long it's been around, is Paul's Online Notes. Now, Paul, when you go to the bottom to look and see if there's anything here, you're like, okay, terms of use, let me see. He is not quite as generous because he's tired of people taking his stuff and not correctly attributing it. So he basically says, you may use this as a text or supplemental, provided you do all of these things, including notifying him. So if I want to use Paul's Online Notes, I am just personally not going to take the time to ask Paul for permission. I'm going to just link to it as he says I'm allowed to. He says you may or encourage. So I'm like, here you go. Go to this site. Check out his example. I particularly like number 3. But this is sort of the difference. And sometimes people don't even have this on their website, right? And you're not sure where the original content came from. In those cases, it's safer to just link out and just be like, hey, here's a great resource. Here's why I like it. Here's how you should engage with it, without having to worry about whether you're allowed to remix or if you're getting in any trouble with copyright. So it's time for a reality check. All of these things take time, right? If you have not done this work in terms of OER materials, it takes a lot of time. Like you saw how many things came up in Merlot when I searched math for elementary school teachers. And I guarantee you 5 of them weren't relevant, but like 3 of them probably were. And then I'd have to check to see if they were at the right level for my students, if I liked the writing style. Did they cover everything I need, or am I going to have to supplement certain ideas, right? That StatsMedic stuff is beautiful, but they cover the geometric distribution. I don't need to. I'm supposed to cover counting and standard deviation inference, and they don't have that. So it's going to be a bit of a Frankenstein and a lot of work. So how do we make this less work, right? Because we want to make sure people are able to make the switch and ready to ditch the textbook. So one recommendation is to start with some sort of organization. This is from my organization. I use notion.so, which is a free site where you can just, there's a lot, it's like almost too powerful, but one of the options is this sort of table where you can put tags. So if I wanted to tag for particular topics, I could. And then I can also, I had little tags for the different licenses and why I put this thing in there so that I would remember when I finally have time to go work on my stats course again, why I put this, because there are things I forget about existing, is my biggest problem. Is I'm like, that was amazing. Let me bookmark that. It's gone. So this sort of keeps me organized. That organization doesn't have to happen in something as intense as this. If you're already doing something in your course, like providing students some materials or resources, one of the things I do to just kind of keep myself sane is I just put an additional resources area for my students. And so here, since they're additional, this is just if you needed more support, I'm not doing that A9 of instructions. I'm not telling them how to interact with the content. I'm saying, if you want more to read and watch, here it is. These are lovely things. And as you can see, all I have done is link out to those sites. So I'm not worried about whether there's any sort of licensing issues for them. I should still probably have an attributions area, but eventually I will go back in and clean all of these things up. So whether you want to organize yourself somewhere in like a Google Sheet or something like that, or if you just want to, as you're going, put things at the bottom for students and eventually yourself, if you're going to go do a little bit more with it, you have that. And now we're to the point where I'm going to tell you this is actually a TED Talk, and the topic is not OER, it's renewable assignments. So I saw a OER week webinar put on by SDCCD Online. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, by Suzanne Joaquin, who's an amazing biology faculty member at Butte College on renewable assignments. And so this quote here, typical assignments, think our homework, our quizzes, our exams, pretty much everything we do in our classes, they add no value to the world. After a student spends their 3 hours creating it, we take our time to grade it, the student throws it away. I mean, do you, right? The students are not keeping my homework assignments. They're not holding on to those quizzes that I graded and handed back. They are tossing them, right? They might help them an assignment where my students can redo it, like my quizzes. I do a standards-based grading so my students can retake quizzes. They might hold on to quizzes for a little bit of time to make sure that they can pass the next quiz. But once they pass that quiz or the course, it's gone, right? It's not going anywhere beyond that student's learning and my assessment of their learning. So a renewable assignment is work that has value beyond that student's learning and our assessment. So this is a table from Wiley. I think it's a little higher in terms of what I would expect from a renewable assignment, but I think we just need at least authentic value beyond supporting the creator's learning. So what do I mean here, and how does that tie into everything we're doing? Well, we can have students do this work for us, right? Think about it. I can ask my students to go find resources and say, hey, here's the thing, especially if I'm still using a textbook now and I want to move that way. Like, hey, look at 3.2, see if you can find something online that teaches the same content. See if you can find me that resource. And we can make it even more of an assessment by asking them, can you tell me the level? Is this above or below, or is this, where in terms of the learning is this? We can ask students to tell us why they chose it, maybe even map it to the objectives for that section, right? So there are a lot of ways we can beef up that assignment in terms of having students find us resources, videos, whatever it might be. So we're not the ones searching on YouTube. In fact, our students probably already have those resources. If we just asked, our students are probably already on YouTube with a favorite math instructor or whatever our discipline is, and we could just ask who that is. If we had an OER that we already knew that we liked or fit most of the bill, but we didn't like certain things about it, we can make assignments to say, hey, why don't you remix this? Go in and find the OER, write it so that's a little bit lower in terms of level, give an introduction, or add some of the steps that this author skipped. I'm thinking of math problems. Math instructors are notoriously bad at and the proof follows, the rest is trivial, that type of thing, that hand waving. We could ask students to go in and add those things. And again, this is all better assessment than my traditional assessments were, because the student has to really understand the content to be able to go in and make these edits. And of course, if we just want more examples, because that's one thing our textbooks do really well, right, are those question banks, we could have students doing that for us. So I used to do this. It wasn't the intent, but this was an old discussion board where I had students identify a topic they were struggling with. So that's here, identify what you're struggling with the most. That's number one. And then number three was find a resource that could help. Google it, YouTube search, and then share it. Explain how it is helpful. And so this was one of those ones where the intent was more just, I needed a discussion board. But the result was students were sharing resources and being like, oh yeah, I love that person. And it was really a nice thing that I didn't necessarily intend for that. Since then, I've been very direct in this. I've had my students start creating examples for me. This happened by accident. I had a discussion board where my students were supposed to show their understanding of accessibility and data displays. So they had to go find a display and describe that display and give me alt text and a descriptive link to the article. And I realized as students were submitting these discussion boards, I now had a repository of sourced graphics with this alt text written that students were interested in, right? Like there's the biggest thing, right? I can go find things, but this was like what students actually cared about in my classes. And so I'm like, I can use these in future years, right? Like I can use this next semester. And when I realized that, I was like, I am doing this from now on. Every discussion board is going to be something that helps build my course for next semester. So this one was a discussion board where I had students create an example, essentially. And they had to, in order to do this, they have to understand what dependent events are. They have to know all of my displays. So this is getting way more into these ideas and probability than any of my assignments had before. So this is a student's example that she did. She came up with this baking example about cinnamon rolls. She said, okay, she doesn't own all the utensils. There's a 40% chance they will turn out successful if she doesn't buy anything. But if she buys the specific utensils that help with cinnamon rolls, there's a 60% chance she'll be successful. She is tight on money, so there's only a 20% chance of her buying all the utensils. So she has created this set of dependent events and then made a beautiful tree diagram. I didn't include that. But this is based on her real life, so it's authentic. This is something that like a ChatGPT would have trouble handling, right? One of those new AI tools. But it's authentic and real to her. And then she had to go make the display, which again is something beyond usually what those kind of websites are capable of doing. And I think for the most part, my feedback from students has been that they love these assignments. They love that they're building towards something else, because I always tell them that's what we're doing. Which takes me to the idea of replacing question banks, right? Like that's one of my favorite things. One of my first transitions from publisher to OER, I will admit that I just still grabbed the publisher text banks that I could export as whatever I can't think of it, the QTI for Canvas. I just was like, export as QTI, put in there, even though I'm not using the textbook, right? That was bad of me. But since then, I have moved beyond that. And I've had my students start helping me with my question banks. I've just been building giant question banks for assessments and for students to reassess with. And so what these have typically looked like, again, another discussion, so students can sort of, and if I really wanted to, and I wanted to get student interaction, if this was a fully online class, I could have the students do this in stages, right? They could have to post a question, have to answer someone else's question with work, and then come back and assess that student's answer. So like if I wanted to, I could make this beefier than I do. But the current version of this is just create a question about the topics from this week. And I give them a list of objectives. And they've seen all of these already in our quizzes throughout the course, throughout the material. So these aren't like new to them. And then I tell them I'm going to use this in the knowledge checks question pool. I am going to take your question, which I have done. I have done this. I already did this one semester and it has been amazing for me. And I asked them, write me a question, either make it a numeric, because I'm math, numeric answer, multiple choice. So if it's multiple choice, they have to write the multiple choice answers. They have to write the hints, right? Canvas can give students little like feedback on questions. So I have them write the feedback on questions to show that if they did a multiple choice, they chose that multiple choice answer for a reason, right? So they have to be like, oh, perhaps like, I think you confuse these two ideas, right? They are showing me so much understanding at the same time as I am just able to copy and paste from their discussion board into my question bank. I just have to spend about an hour, whereas before it took me an hour to write 4 questions for my question bank. Now I have 40 questions in that same amount of time. And I got to assess my students. So easy and lovely. In the true spirit of like universal design for learning, which was my like, let's have both text and video for students to learn from. I also think that we can give assessment options. Again, all of them can help us build. So all of those resources that we love about publisher material, we can have our students building for us. So this is a kind of low stakes assessment, a formative assessment, where I had my students build me a formative assessment, right? They had to give me 2 truths and a lie, something I could use as a kind of early formative assessment in my classes for next semester, right? Because we had a 2 truths and a lie worksheet. So I'm basically having them write me new worksheet problems. So they had to give me criteria. They had to give me 3 statements that were 2 truths and a lie related to the learning topics. And so here's one example. Student wrote down what their 2 truths and a lie were, and then they explained number 1 was the lie. Here's the correct answer. Here's why a student might not see that issue. And I'm like, great, perfect. I have a worksheet. We had an in-class activity where I had my students sketch a graph based on information. And it was like, I'd give it to them a little bit at a time. So now we're in the activities, right? And so I said, okay, well, you know what? Those were not the easiest thing in the world to build. Maybe I should have my students build me that. So I said, you guys do that. And again, give me an answer key. Tell me why you've chosen these things. So I had a student do that same thing. Here are the questions, here are the statements, and here's what a possible solution might look like. The third option, these are all assessing the same objectives, was since I do standards-based grading and my students can retake quizzes, I'm lucky enough to have a couple of really cool resources that are open that I can use to make reassessments in math. But some topics, they didn't have what I wanted. And one of them is a graph that students I can ask students questions about. It's just a pain to build them. And so I asked students, make me a new graph and questions that I don't have to write 10 versions of quiz number 3 again. Instead, I'll have some from you because some of them weren't what I wanted. And so I have a student who made a beautiful graph in Desmos and 6 questions along with the answer key. This work would have taken me 20 minutes, right? It probably took the student much longer, but showed their understanding. And now I have another reassessment, right, for the next semester. So I think we need to recognize our students are capable of doing a lot. And these authentic assessments, yes, they do take a little bit of time to grade, but I assure you, grading them is way more fun. And they're saving me time in the long run. Not to mention, in almost all of these cases, these are replacing an exam. These more project-based things. I'm not doing an exam on limits for this class. This was their portfolio assignment to submit one of these options and let me know how they understood limits in a different way. All right. Whirlwind. I forgot about my Google Doc. Maybe we'll go back to it later. Some small steps to get started. So we'll have some time to brainstorm at the end or me to show off Jamboard since we had that one question. But first, if you're thinking about getting started with this, you know someone who's thinking about getting started with this. One is to plan. Determine what it is that the publisher is giving you that you cannot live without, right? I think that if you really think about it, there's not going to be a whole lot, right? The resources are great, but probably you can find similar or you have a good enough idea to do that on your own. But whatever your must-haves are, if it's the formative assessments of the online homework like system, if that's your must have, that's going to be a lot more work to replace. So maybe that's a low cost alternative or a slow build over time, right? You're building those question banks using students or seeing if you can find QTIs of question banks in the Canvas Commons or elsewhere, because that's going to be a harder ask, right? Like it really depends what your must-haves are. So again, if you determine your must-haves, I will call back to that worksheet now, or the thing. This might be a place to put that help with the transition, right? Like here, I know that in order for me to make this leap, I need this, right? If you're teaching a language, it could be really hard because you need the audio that came with your book, right? So if I can't recreate that audio or find it elsewhere, I'm not going to be able to make that transition. So that's something worth noting for, but that's also something that we have OER analysts like Madeline and OER librarians at the different campuses who can help with, or we can see if we can figure out some other way to make that happen. Second, with the content, I think it's easier to start with the student-facing stuff. You can still use the resources that were for you as an instructor, right? If you're like into those PowerPoint slides or the test generator or whatever it is, like as you're making this transition, maybe take a semester or two where you are recreating those things that are instructor-facing slower, but tell the students, don't be that 80% of faculty whose students aren't actually using the textbook. Just tell the students not to buy the textbook and maybe fudge a bit on using those resources still. And then obviously, if you can, I've built a lot of my stuff, but curation is a much simpler thing. There's no reason for you to recreate the wheel. There is some value to having a video of yourself, but you can have that video as an overview in the module, explaining why you've chosen the content you've chosen or introducing the topic before you dive into these beautifully produced videos that exist already on YouTube. So don't feel like you have to make everything. Know that you can just curate good content. And that's an easier thing too to ask your students to do. Because you can't ask them to build. I have students who built me things, but curation is a little bit easier of a task. And then the last piece is to use your students, right? Like I said, authentic assessment allows us to have those abilities where we have our students creating content. Not only does it help us, but they really feel better about doing the assessments in terms of like knowing that it's going somewhere, right? Like the feedback I got from students was overwhelmingly like, this is so cool to know a student is going to have to see this question and see my question about surfing or whatever they had written. And then if you don't want to have that, maybe just add like a discussion board where students can share resources, right? And just make that the whole discussion board. Like, hey, did you find a good resource? Share it here, or throw that in Pronto one day and be like, hey, has anybody got a good resource? And that's another really easy way. It's not a true assessment. It's not an assignment for the students, but an easy way for you to find materials that your students are already using and is at a level that they enjoy. Yes. Thank you, Angela. And then another piece is know you aren't alone. If you can find someone to do this journey with you. This picture is from a FIG, that's a faculty inquiry group that I did with 3 of my colleagues in math. We decided to remix this site Skew the Script, which was Creative Commons license for remixing, their examples into our lecture notes. So we had lecture notes for two upcoming sections that were a little bit sparse. And so we just remixed OER content into them. And then we took turns making videos for different sections so that we weren't all doing the work, right? It was 4 people splitting up the work of making these videos. And the advantage to students was they got to see the styles of different professors. They maybe got to see someone who looked like them presenting the content. So it was really a nice experience to be able to say like, hey, here are the examples we all like. Let's just take turns. I'm going to do 8.1, you do 8.2, you do like, we divided the workload. And since it was a faculty inquiry group, which we get funding for at Mesa, we were able to get paid to do some of this work too, which was nice. So finding someone to do the work is helpful. And then of course, as Angela mentioned, there's a lot of grants and resources out there. I know that we had our ZTC grant at the district level. There might be funding again. So those are the types of things. Mesa has Mosaic, so there's still funding available there. And we have people who can help you with this as well. So just know you aren't alone. This is something you want to do, but you seem overwhelmed by, find somebody else to do it, or reach out for help. Like I said, you have that little space in that OER document, or you can just email me. My contact information is here on the next slide. So yeah, 13 minutes to spare. Do we have any questions, or anybody want to share any ideas? I had all that space for brainstorming, but just powered through it.
Can you briefly touch on Jamboard, setting it up?
Yes. Are there any OER questions? So I'll pause the video before we do the Jamboard bit, or stop the video, because I don't think we need that.